What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. We have made it to week 17 of the NFL season, which means this is the final week of regular season football before the playoffs begin. But no worries, as always, I have got my weekly NFL game breakdowns, outright versus the spread, along with our locks of the week. If you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, check us out online at adpfantasy.com. Join the community, sign up for the free newsletter. All the details in the description, but for now, let's get right into it. We kick things off directly on Sunday, as this being the last week of the NFL season. There are no Thursday, Saturday, or Monday night games. Our first game, we have got the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, before we get too into this, I do want to kind of give out a quick disclaimer. I've said this before, but I do want to highlight it again. With this being week 17, the final week of the season, and teams resting their players, these being all divisional games, and NFL draft positioning being a factor, this last week is one of the toughest weeks to predict in terms of outcomes, and also one of the riskiest weeks to bet on, especially on the spread. So just do keep that in mind. But nonetheless, we have still got our foolproof advice coming at you. And it begins with this matchup. Now, the last time the Falcons and the Bucs played, the Bucs kind of had a pretty dominant performance. Matt Ryan struggled. That offensive line really struggled as well. And the Falcons found themselves in a hole pretty quickly. Now, the Falcons are 6-9, Bucs 7-8. Falcons coming off a nice win over the Jaguars. Bucs losing versus the Texans. Winston was a turnover machine. And the Falcons, took advantage of that Jacksonville defense. Both those results kind of went as we predicted, and this week we're expecting a Falcons victory. Now, other than that, I guess the big news coming out of both of these camps, if you're a fan of these teams, is that for the Falcons, they're going to go ahead and retain Dan Quinn, while the Bucs are also going to retain a big piece in Jameis Winston. Now, that doesn't mean that the Bucs won't bring in competition, but that's a discussion for another time. Diving back into this matchup, the reason I like the Falcons, both these teams record-wise pretty close, and usually I say that these series will be a split, but more so here, I'm looking at the health factor. There are no healthy wide receivers left for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point in time. We know Jameis Winston is turnover prone. Last week was a perfect example. And I do think this Falcons defense will be able to handle the pass catchers that the Bucs have. And right now, I think Matt Ryan is kind of getting into a groove. Julio Jones is dominating, and having Austin Hooper back also really helps. Devonta Freeman was a big factor in last week's game. Now, I will say Devonta Freeman had a huge performance in week 16, but it'll probably be tougher sledding versus this Tampa Bay rush defense. But I still think he leaves his mark as a pass catcher. My final thoughts on this is, at the end of the day, Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston. Right now, I just like the pieces around Matt Ryan more so. The Tampa Bay secondary doesn't really scare me all that much. Advantage Atlanta. The spread pretty low. Bucs are favored at -1.5. So since we do like the Falcons outright, we're going with them on the spread as well. Next up, we have got the New York Jets at the Buffalo Bills. The Jets at 6-9, coming off a nice little victory over the Steelers. But again, more so than anything, they've just highlighted that they're one of these wildly inconsistent teams that no matter the result, too little, too late for them at this point in the year. Well, the Bills at 10-5, coming off a loss versus the Patriots. But hey, guys, look, you've still clinched a wild card spot, the number 5 seed in the AFC. And no matter what happens here, you can't really do anything about the seeding. And that particular conundrum kind of perfectly encapsulates the week 17 scenario of, even though you clearly have one team that's better than the other, in this case the Bills compared to the Jets, they've got the better record, they've been more consistent all season long, they've got the better defense, and they are at home. Bettors realize what's going on, they recognize the situation, and the spread is only -1.5 for the Bills here. Now, albeit they're still favored, sure, maybe in part that's because Bills coaching staff has said that they're going to go with their starters here, which I don't think there's really any point in, maybe to get some practice heading into the playoffs. But man, it would be disastrous if injury strikes for the Bills. I think the real question here is, how long will these starters play for? Sure, let them go ahead and kind of get some practice in versus real NFL game action. But you can't tell me if the Jets come out to a lead and it's late in the game that the Bills are going to continue to play their starters with nothing to gain. And honestly, that's why my overall advice for this game in particular is to stay away from it and avoid betting on it. Now, I do give the slight edge to the Bills if you force me to choose, and that's purely on the assumption that they do play their starters for the majority of this game. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game here, whatever happens. So both teams are going to be in it. That's what really scares me about it. And at the end of the day, I do think that the Bills, with the spread being so low, can win by at least 2 points. Unless you think that the Bills are only going to win by 1 point like the first time these two teams played, I would be going with the Bills outright, which is what I'm currently doing. Also going to take them on the spread because of the extremely low number. Next up, we have got the Chicago Bears at the Minnesota Vikings. The Bears are at 7-8 after that loss to the Kansas City Chiefs that we all predicted. Pat Mahomes again reminded Chicago fans what could have been as he trolled them by reminding them how many players were selected before him, with one of those being yours truly, Mitchell Trubisky. But instead, let's focus in on something else, and that is the fact that this is yet again a game with two teams that have nothing to gain, because the Bears have been out of the playoffs for a couple weeks now, while the Vikings, after that loss to the Green Bay Packers, are now 10-5. They fall out of contention to win the NFC North, similar situation to what happened with the Bills and the Patriots last week, and now they are locked into the number 6 seed in the NFC. Now, I will say there is no doubt in my mind that the Vikings are the better team compared to the Bears. But with this being the last game of the season, even though it's a home game for the Vikings and the injury history that the Vikings have had, look at guys like Thielen, Diggs, and more importantly, Dalvin Cook, I think there's no reason to risk it here for the Vikings. In fact, I had initially picked the Vikings to win outright, assuming that they would rest some of their guys. But with recent reports saying that they're probably not going to play a bulk of their main dudes, I've kind of gone ahead and said, I'm going with the Chicago Bears outright. I don't feel all that comfortable about it because, again, you're betting on Mitch Trubisky. But I guess if you think about it, the only time Trubisky delivers is versus awful defenses or when it just simply doesn't matter. And that would definitely fall under this scenario. However, I will say, on the spread, currently the Vikings are at -6.5. Hurry up and grab that spread pick because I love the Chicago Bears on the spread. That was even before the announcement was made that the Vikings would rest a majority of their guys. I think this is going to be an ugly game. The way I see it going is either the Bears barely win, or maybe the Vikings barely win, or the Bears blow out the Vikings. In either scenario, I believe the Bears will cover on the spread. So go ahead, at least book that ticket. I think that's as close to a sure thing on the spread as you have this week. So Bears right now outright, but more importantly, the focus here is the spread pick where we're also going Chicago. Next up, we've got the Cleveland Browns at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Browns are 6-9 coming off that expected loss versus the Ravens, while the Bengals at 1-14 after that dramatic loss to the Dolphins now officially have the worst record in the NFL. And maybe consolation prize, congratulations Cincinnati, you now also own the first pick in the upcoming draft, which likely means your new quarterback will be one Joe Burrow. But that's a conversation for another time as we get closer to that NFL draft in 2020. For now, what you need to know about this game is there's not a whole lot to play for. With either side, the Browns as dysfunctional of a team as you could want. The bigger question for them is how many of those names and extremely talented guys are going to be back next year, considering all the drama issues that they have. But for now, those guys are available, and I think those guys will take advantage of this defensive matchup versus the Bengals, where they had a pretty good outing the first time they played. Baker Mayfield had a decent game. I think he can go ahead and do the same. On the flip side, the Browns have the defensive advantage as well. But I will say now, with the pressure off of the shoulders of the Bengals, with them not potentially having anything to lose if they actually win a game. Wouldn't be all that shocked if they make this one close and make the Browns sweat and potentially get an upset. But right now, I'm riding with the Browns, who I think will take advantage of that Bengals defense, which we are highlighting yet again because it has been an issue all season long. Andy Dalton, even though he'll be playing for his NFL future, it probably won't be in Cincinnati unless he stays there as a backup role. He's had a nice little couple of games to finish off the season. I still think even though it's in a loss, he'll put together some decent stats. But at the end, give me the Browns outright. The spread, not all that large. Bengals plus 2.5. So the Browns correctly are favored. I think the Browns can go ahead and win by at least 3 points. So I will take them there. Next up, we have got the Green Bay Packers at the Detroit Lions in our first somewhat meaningful game of the week. The Packers, 12-3 NFC North champs after taking down the Vikings last week, face the Detroit Lions, who are 3-11-1 and are one of the worst teams in the NFL, but that was expected after the loss of one Matthew Stafford, and also considering how poor their defense has played all season long. Now, the reason that this game is still meaningful for the Packers is because they could potentially get home field advantage. If they screw things up, it could cost them. So they have a lot to play for. They're not going to know the result of the 49ers and Seattle game until later in the night. So they have to put their best foot forward here. And let me make it clear, this will be an easy win for the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers versus the Detroit Lions quarterback situation, which is absolutely awful. And then when you factor in that defense of the Lions, I don't care how much Rodgers has struggled, maybe stats-wise, he's going to have all types of success here. And if not him, it'll be Aaron Jones. So expect the Packers easy win. I think they come out to a lead somewhat fast. The only thing that has me somewhat worried is the spread here. Somewhat big, double digits, plus 10.5, which, look, normally I'd go ahead and say take the Packers easy. But I do think it's a real scenario that the Packers come out with a big lead. They're up 15, 20 points in the third quarter. They sit Aaron Rodgers in the main pieces at that point in time, which then allows the Lions to kind of get back in the game, put up some garbage time points, and go ahead and ruin that spread pick. So do keep an eye out for that. Now, regardless of all of these things, I'm still taking the Packers on the spread. I think they're going to come out with a big enough lead, big enough cushion, and they'll be able to cover that number. But again, if you don't want to be too risky here, just stick to the Packers outright, which is one of the locks of the week. Next, we've got the LA Chargers at the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chargers 5-10, losing yet another close divisional game last week. But hey, what's new? The Kansas City Chiefs 11-4 took care of business versus the Bears. And technically, they still have an outside chance of being the number 2 seed in the AFC, but that would require extra help in the form of a loss by the New England Patriots, which is extremely unlikely. However, the Chiefs still do have to go ahead and somewhat take this game seriously, at least for a bit, which is the reason why I think the Chiefs ultimately end up getting the victory. However, I will say on the spread, -7.5, a little bit high for my liking, because at some point I think we all expect Patrick Mahomes to go ahead and get benched. He's just way too important for the Chiefs, and he's had some injuries this season. But at the same time, the Chiefs have proven that they've got a capable backup in Matt Moore. They've got an improving defense, and they have got weapons offensively. Burners at the wide receiver position outside of Tyreek Hill, which gives me confidence that they'll be able to hang on to this victory. And when you throw in this being a home game in Kansas City and facing the turnover-prone Phillip Rivers, well, that is another benefit for the Chiefs. I'd like them outright. Now, I will say I'm not as confident taking them on the spread. That is true. I think ultimately it comes down to how long Patrick Mahomes plays. But I do think he ends up playing for at least 2-3 quarters. The Chiefs get this victory and maybe even build upon it with a guy like Matt Moore under center, which we've seen that they can do in the absence of Patrick Mahomes before. So I'll actually take the Chiefs outright, and somewhat surprisingly on the spread as well at -7.5. Next up, we've got the Miami Dolphins at the New England Patriots. The Dolphins 4-11 after that actually pretty exciting win over the Cincinnati Bengals in overtime, while the New England Patriots 12-3 taking out the Bills last week and assuring that they win the division and more than likely the number 2 seed. But like we said before when talking about the Chiefs, there's technically an outside chance, as unlikely as it is, that if the Patriots lose, that they could end up being the 3rd seed in the AFC. But considering this game is in New England, Bill Belichick is the coach, and Brady and company are playing the division rival Miami Dolphins defense, no shot that happens. I don't think there's any way the Patriots sleep on the Dolphins. And for that reason, I think they are a lock this week. But I will say there is something I hate about this game, and it is 100% the spread at the biggest number of the week at minus 15.5. And look, I get it. The Patriots are leaps and bounds better than the Dolphins. The first time they played, the Patriots absolutely crushed the Dolphins. And I do expect the Patriots, to begin with, will have a good game offensively, and the defense will do its thing. But as time goes on, again, I think we're going to run into the situation of how long do the Patriots play the starters. And with this being such a huge number, and with Ryan Fitzpatrick successfully throwing it around, and this Dolphins team, in my opinion, having improved since the last time they played, I think the Miami Dolphins can get some garbage time points and cover that number on the spread. Minus 15.5, more than 2 touchdowns, just way too high for me. As of late, the Patriots haven't really been blowing out teams, so maybe a little bit controversial, but I'm going to take the Miami Dolphins on the spread. That number is way too big for comfort, but I will take the Patriots outright. That is one of our locks of the week. Next, we have got the New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers. Again, similar to Green Bay at Detroit, a somewhat meaningful game because of where the Saints stand. At 12-3, they have also got a chance of being one of these teams that comes out of the NFC with a first round bye with a pretty high seed, number 1, number 2. But it's going to depend on some scenarios, whether the Packers win, whether the Saints win, whether the 49ers win. That's why the Saints will have to go ahead and, at least for a bit, play this game with their starters and not really let the Panthers get a hold. Now, I will say the Panthers 5-10 got absolutely obliterated by the Colts last week, and we said watch out for that. That's probably going to be a blowout. Exactly what happened. Will Grier in his first start was absolutely just not ready for it. The Colts defense dominated the Panthers. The Panthers defense continues to be horrendous, and I think we're going to see much of the same versus the Saints. Again, you can bring up how long are the Saints going to play their starters for. Personally, I think it's going to be, again, probably for at least 3 quarters. But with the Panthers and Will Grier under center and DJ Moore expected to miss this game, I have zero faith in the Panthers being able to put up points here. It's going to be the Christian McCaffrey show, as it is always. But he's not going to be able to keep up with the Saints scoring. The Saints defense better than that of the Indianapolis Colts. I think they're going to make it a long day for one Will Grier. Several turnovers, and I expect the Saints to win comfortably. I love them outright. I also really like them on the spread. Big number at plus 13.5. But the Panthers, with their 3rd string quarterback and Will Grier, have zero chance here. The only way it happens, again, is if the Saints sit their starters early on. I don't see that happening, so I'll take the Saints outright and on the spread. Continuing on, we have got the Washington Redskins at the Dallas Cowboys. The Redskins 3-12 after losing last week to the Giants, while the Dallas Cowboys 7-8. So much for their season, more than likely after they lost to the Eagles last week. In all likelihood, they are not making the playoffs unless they get extremely lucky and the Eagles botch it versus the Giants. But I am not expecting that at the moment. However, the Cowboys still technically have a very small chance to go ahead and win the division. So I do think they're going to go ahead and be pretty competitive in this game and get a victory when it's all said and done. But let me say this. I think it'll be a lot closer than people think. Dak Prescott still iffy with that shoulder. We saw maybe kind of bothered him last week. The offense not clicking. Amari Cooper not 100%. The defense not playing up to expectations. But the biggest thing for me here is the Redskins will be with Case Keenum under quarterback. After Dwayne Haskins got hurt last week, Keenum is back quarterbacking for the Redskins, and we said it since day one. He is the best quarterback for this team. He really makes this offense go. He's more experienced than any of the guys there, and I think that will be the difference maker for the Redskins to make this game close for a number on the spread that I think is way too high at minus 10.5. I'll take the Cowboys outright, but I actually love the Redskins on the spread with Case Keenum back in action. Next, we've got the Oakland Raiders at the Denver Broncos. The Raiders 7-8, beating the Chargers last week, miraculously actually have a chance of still making the playoffs at potentially 8-8 in the AFC, but they need just a tremendous amount of help. It's not even funny. Now, actually, I think some of those scenarios for the Raiders could happen, but the first and foremost, most important one, which is the Raiders winning at Denver versus the Broncos, who are 6-9, coming off that win versus the Lions, I think is actually the least likely to happen. The Broncos, home game for them, I think they can go ahead and take advantage of this Raiders defense. Josh Jacobs not expected to play, the best offensive player that the Raiders have. The Broncos defense is above average. I think it could take advantage of an inconsistent Derek Carr. And Drew Lock, he's got some weapons offensively. I think he's going to have a good day versus the Raiders, this being a home game for the Broncos as well. I like them to win outright. The spread minus 3.5, not all that high, even though I think probably the most likely scenario is that the Broncos win by right around a field goal. But I'm going to go ahead and play it kind of risky and say that the Broncos can go ahead and cover, win by at least 4 points. No matter how important this game is for the Raiders, I think the Broncos are just the more complete team. And with Josh Jacobs potentially missing this game, I give the edge to the Broncos. Next up, we've got the Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans. The Titans 8-7. This is a playoff game in all aspects for them because it's win and get in for the Titans. Even with that loss to the Saints last week, they still control their own destiny. So beat the Texans, who right now have nothing to play for, and the Titans will be the 6th seed in the AFC. The Texans at 10-5 have locked up the division. They're probably not going to play their starters for the majority of the game, similar to a lot of these games with divisional first place teams. I would say track the news coming out in terms of starts and sits, because that could have an impact at least on the spread or how you feel about the Titans outright. Now, I do believe at some point Watson will be sat. I do think he starts off this game to go ahead and give the Texans some practice, like we've said for other teams heading into the playoffs. But ultimately, the Titans with just so much to play for, getting Derrick Henry back, that's the expectation. I think they could take advantage of this Texans defense, and with some point into this game, the starters for the Texans likely being sat, I think the Titans can go ahead and get the victory. That's reflected on the spread here. The Texans are plus 4.5, so the Titans are road favorites here. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. I like them outright, and I actually also like them on the spread. I think they can win by at least 5 points. I think they're going to hold the lead for the majority of this game, and when the Texans see that there's really no point in continuing to play their guys, they're going to sit them. The Titans are going to build an even larger lead, ergo they cover that spread. Next, we've got the Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars. In all reality, not much to play for or watch here. The Colts, 7-8, absolutely demolished the Panthers last week. The Jaguars, 5-10, losing to the Falcons, where the Falcons ran all over them, and the defense couldn't really stop anyone. The only reason people were probably going to be watching this game is to see the impact it has on the NFL draft order. Other than that, not too much to get excited about. Breaking down this game, I like the Colts. I think they're the more balanced team. I think they've got the better defense. And I think they can take advantage of young quarterbacks like we saw when they played Will Grier last week. The last time these two teams played, it was the return of Nick Foles, but the Colts absolutely dominated the Jaguars. Even though that was in Indianapolis, I don't think that makes all that much difference. The Colts offense, a little bit better. I think Marlon Mack will have a big day. The defense better than that of the Jaguars, in my opinion, as well. So I like the Colts outright to get a win here. The spread plus 3.5 for the Jaguars. When you factor in probably a turnover here or there from the young Minshew, I think the Colts can go ahead and cover the spread. So I like them there as well. Next up, we've got the Arizona Cardinals at the LA Rams. The Cardinals 5-9-1, extremely impressive win over the Seattle Seahawks. Didn't really mean all that much for them, but huge disappointing loss for Seattle as they have a lot of playoff implications heading into Week 17. LA Rams, on the other side of it, 8-7, stayed in it versus the San Francisco 49ers, but ultimately the better team won. Now, the big storyline here is that Kyler Murray more than likely will not play, which kind of explains the spread. The Rams at -7.5. And I'll be honest with you guys, if Murray doesn't play, which is the expectation at this point in time, I love the Rams. I like them outright, and I actually also like them on the spread. I think they can have success versus this Cardinals defense. And without Kyler Murray, I don't think the Cardinals will be able to put up enough points to chase the Rams on the spread. So right now, all signs point to the Rams offensively, defensively, and if Kyler Murray does sit out, then this becomes almost a lock in my eyes. So go ahead and keep an eye out for Murray's status. If he somehow does miraculously suit up for this game, then I still like the Rams, but then I would go with the Cardinals on the spread. But for now, with the circumstances being what they are, no Murray, Rams outright and on the spread. Moving on, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles at the New York Giants. The Eagles 8-7, and after that huge win, probably the biggest win of the year for them over the Dallas Cowboys in Week 16, look like they will win the NFC East, barring any disasters here. If they somehow get upset by the Giants, who are 4-11, coming off a win over the Redskins. And if you guys remember, only a couple of weeks ago when these two teams played, it was really close. In fact, the Eagles needed a lot of help. They needed a comeback, and they needed overtime to beat the Giants in a game where Eli Manning started. But maybe you can throw out some of the stats considering the weather in that game. However, now Daniel Jones is back for the Giants. Even though he is more mobile, he's more athletic, I actually think because he is more turnover prone than Eli, that hurts the Giants' chances a little bit. But maybe kind of balancing things out is that Zach Ertz not going to play in this game. The already limited pass catching group of the Eagles takes another huge hit. It's going to be probably the Dallas Goedert show, Miles Sanders, but good news for the Eagles. Carson Wentz has played very well to finish out the season. Now, I will say, I don't think that the Eagles are going to blow it here, which would be a colossal just failure on their side if after all the work they do to beat the Cowboys last week, they fall flat versus the Giants. I think they will win this outright, but I think it will be very close. I think the Giants can hang in there. The Eagles right now are just so injury-plagued offensively that the Giants have got a chance here. I will say, however, I do think a couple things happen. One being Saquon Barkley's nice little streak comes to an end in terms of him having successful days on the ground. But at least Daniel Jones is facing this very beatable Eagles secondary. So I do think there is some give and take there to balance that out. At the end, I will take the Eagles outright, but the Giants at plus 4.5. I think they keep pressure on the Eagles throughout this game. I think they ultimately lose, but by no more than 3 or 4 points. So I will take them on the spread. Next, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. The Steelers 8-7. Very tough loss versus the Jets last week, but despite that, they still have got a chance at the playoffs. Kudos to you, Mike Tomlin. Without Big Ben and having to go ahead and pick between Rudolph and Duck Hodges, you've still managed to potentially give the Steelers a winning record and a chance into the playoffs, but obviously the Steelers need the Titans to lose, which I wouldn't get my hopes up about. But focusing in on this game, let's look at the Ravens at 13-2. They are the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they did us all a favor by announcing pretty early on that they will be resting a large number of their starters. So that means no Lamar Jackson. They're going to be without a lot of their defensive pieces as well. But guess what? I still like the Ravens to win this game. The spread tells you that the Ravens are underdogs at plus 2.5. I understand where bettors are coming from here, but guess what? RG3 is a pretty similar type of quarterback compared to Lamar Jackson when it comes to what he likes to do. So I think this is a very well-suited offense for him. And with the Steelers not having anyone at the quarterback position, I think that the Ravens defense, even with some missing pieces, will get the job done. Nobody on the Steelers offense scares me, so I will take the Ravens to win this game. I think it'll be low scoring. I think it'll be ugly, but ultimately they win. Plus 2.5 on the spread for Baltimore. Since we like them outright, we're going to go ahead and take them on the spread as well. And finally, we get to our Sunday night clash between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. Pretty much the only game worth watching if you can pick one out of the slew of games in Week 17. And surprisingly, this is a huge game this late in the season between two teams that can still win the NFC West. The first time these two teams played, the 49ers got a little bit unlucky via a missed field goal. Went into overtime, ultimately end up losing. They're at 12-3 coming off that win over the Rams. Seattle 11-4, huge loss versus the Arizona Cardinals last week. Now they need to win this game to go ahead and really have a chance at a first round bye, but that's going to require a loss from the Saints and from the Packers, which I don't see coming, which again is why you can see why that loss versus the Cardinals was so big for them. But let's look at the storylines here. For the 49ers, it's those defensive injuries. And we said it after that win over the New Orleans Saints. It came at a cost because ever since then, this 49ers defense has been getting exposed. And for the Seattle Seahawks, boy, they have nobody left at the running back position. So welcome back, Marshawn Lynch. Man, that is crazy to say, crazy to think, but it's a blast from the past. The real question is, how ready will Lynch be for game time action? Look, if Chris Carson was here for this game, I would favor the Seahawks, but because of the running back situation and because the Seattle Seahawks like to run the football, I got to give the slight edge to the 49ers. Now, don't get me wrong, this game could go either way. I think it's going to be extremely exciting. And about the only thing I know for sure is it's going to be really entertaining with both teams having a chance to win. I don't anticipate it'll be a blowout. That'll honestly be the biggest surprise here if that comes. But the 49ers can go ahead and have some success. We saw it the first time these two teams played. The Seattle Seahawks versus this weekend 49ers defense can also have some success. I'm going to take the 49ers to ultimately split this series. They got, like we said earlier, a little bit unlucky the first time these two teams played. I think they even it out here, end up winning the division. But on the spread, I think this is a great game to hedge your bets. It's an NFC West divisional contest. You throw out everything here. These two teams are very close, record-wise, talent-wise. So I think it goes down to the wire. I think it's close, and whoever wins barely ekes out a victory similar to the first contest. So I will take at plus 3.5 the Seattle Seahawks on the spread. So with that, we wrap up our pick'ems. Now looking at our locks of the week, we start with the Green Bay Packers at the Detroit Lions. Like we said before, the Packers still have something to play for. They can get home field advantage. They can get a first round bye. This win would be huge for them. I think they get it done, no problem. Not a guarantee on the spread, but outright it is a lock. Next, Miami at New England. The Patriots, no way they lose here versus the Dolphins. Huge number on the spread, but outright, no chance in Foxborough versus this weak Miami Dolphins defense and what it could mean if they lose and the Chiefs win. I like the Patriots at home. Then New Orleans at the Carolina Panthers. We said it last week with the Colts and the Panthers. That was one of our locks. The Saints still have something to play for, similar to the Packers. They're a better team than the Colts. We'll agree are going to start yet again. This has blowout written all over it. Continuing on, we're going to go ahead and point out the Arizona at the LA Rams game, and this is subject to Kyler Murray not playing. If he doesn't, which is trending that way, I will take the Rams there. That offense without Kyler Murray does not scare me. And finally, Philadelphia at the Giants. I just don't think the Eagles will blow that huge victory over the Dallas Cowboys in a loss versus the Giants. I think they win. Carson Wentz has been pretty good these last few weeks, and ultimately they get into the playoffs. And with that, we wrap things up. And as usual, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with these picks, along with any other questions you guys might have? I will do my best to answer them. And if you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, check us out online at adpfantasy.com. Become a part of the community, join the free newsletter, get early access to these breakdowns, and all the details are in the description, so check that out. And in the meantime, I'll see you guys in future videos.